Whew. Man, it sure is a lot of work watching every anime of the season. But now I get my favorite part, reading what the comments think.
Very good episode. However, dude,
Chainsaw Man was full of such terrible CGI I could barely make it through the first episode. Story seemed good, but holy crap, the CGI made me sick.
I don't know why MAPPA insists on making the rest of the episode god-tier animation, but then using CGI fight scenes.
I'm so tired of sloppy, jumpy, shiny CGI in anime. Chainsaw Man and Bleach TYBW is so bad with it.
I see a lot of praise for Chainsaw Man, and the animation is good. However, the CGI is really bad, and it needs to be called out.
Debate me, bro. CG ruins every anime it's in, apart from mech and Titan anime.
I like how people are straight coping with the CGI. It looks so jarring, especially Denji.
I honestly don't know if people defending CGI even watch the show before defending everything MAPPA touches. It feels so fuck awkward when a 3D sprite moves through a static 2D background and even 2D enemies. My brain doesn't let me enjoy what I'm seeing because it focuses on how much it is bad. It is such a shame seeing animes like this and Out never reaching their full potential because animators are obligated to rush their job.
I'm sorry, do you have eyes? Are we maybe living in, like, parallel dimensions connected over the internet? Ooh, that's a good idea for a novel. Oh, right, sorry, I was just... What?! How can... Calm Blue Lake, Geoff. Calm Blue Lake. I'm trying to be less angry and confrontational with my content, but, we gotta fucking talk. The anime community has a tendency to hold on to ideas well past the point where they're valid or useful at all. The subs versus dubs debate is a great example. Back in the DVD era, when lots of anime were legitimately butchered by their English TV cuts, and many of the more faithful dubs were lacking in the acting and localization departments, while costing $10 per episode, there was a lot of good reason for anime fans to strongly caution new viewers away from most of them, lest they be disappointed in the viewing experience and think less of our niche hobby as a whole for it. But anime isn't something you gotta convince most people to get into anymore, and dubs haven't been that bad for a good long while now. A lot of them are pretty great these days even, and most of them are, at the bare minimum, listenable, narratively coherent, engagingly performed alternatives to the sub for anyone who wants to watch anime while multitasking or needs an extra layer of localization to understand the nuance or appreciate the jokes. And if you don't think that's a high bar for anime dubs to clear, you also definitely don't remember a time before YouTube. Which is fine, but if so, you have no reason to carry on the old feuds of your forefathers. The correct answer to subs or dubs is simple and obvious now. Por qué no los dos? Subs for when you're on the couch, fully engaged. Dubs for when you're eating or on the treadmill or whatever. They are both generally good options with situational advantages and disadvantages. But try telling certain corners of the internet that and... Oh, fuck, I guess I just did. Still, that camp is at least shrinking in the modern day, while the 3D CG is ruining anime crowd remains loud and proud, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that it's fine most of the time, actually. So fine, you don't even notice it. And when you do notice it, it makes a lot of anime look substantially better, even. Also, even when it's not better than good 2D animation, it still beats bad 2D animation by several country miles. But I mean, when it's good, Chainsaw Man looks like a fucking movie. And I don't just mean like Demon Slayer does with the fancy cinematic post-processing effects applied to TV-style limited animation, though that's quite cool in its own way too. But Chainsaw Man is animated like a full-budget, made-for-cinema anime movie, with a level of polish, weighty, realistic motion, and complexity in shot composition comparable to if not quite the works of Makoto Shinkai, then at least one of the higher budget studios biting his style. And Chainsaw Man doesn't bite anyone's style. It creates its own, drawing on the same filmic influences as the original manga to emulate the cinematography and editing sensibilities of Hollywood legends like Quentin Tarantino, Sam Raimi, and David Lynch. It's not just one of the most visually arresting anime ever put on television, it's visually arresting in a very specific way that supports the tone and subtext of the original narrative perfectly, and allows the anime to match the manga pound for pound, if not in terms of Fujimoto's subtle directorial genius, then at least his messily violent artwork's horrifically specific details. And just like Makoto Shinkai's filmography, none of it would be possible, especially not on a TV anime production schedule, without a talented and efficient team of digital and 3D artists working in concert with the 2D team. I mean, Mob Psycho 100 pulls off crazy 3D looking fights on TV with entirely hand-drawn art, but its characters are all extremely simple, easy to animate shapes. One guy's head is literally a cube, and Mob is only called Mob because he looks exactly like the simplest possible background character. You can practically animate an entire Mob Psycho fight scene in the same amount of lines and time it would take to hand draw a full detail, manga accurate Chainsaw Man head turning around slightly, let alone his entire body plus a whole crowd of zombies. But if you simplify the designs too much for greater fluidity, you risk ruining the tone by making it too cartoony, an issue I've talked about before in my video on the problem with horror anime. And Chainsaw Man isn't just a horror anime, it's a horror action comedy. So it absolutely needs to be heavily animated to work at all. To be properly told on a remotely reasonable production schedule, Chainsaw Man's story needed 3D animation and digital effects, as well as heavy digital 2D animation and almost every traditional animation trick in the book, including rotoscoping, with all of those techniques combining to tear down almost every barrier between the 2D and 3D in the show, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't want to fixate too much on how Chainsaw Man looks as great as it does, which is, to be clear, so great that anyone who thinks otherwise definitely sold their eyes to the Potato Devil, because this is far from the only anime the CGI haters are wrong about. It's just the one where it's the most blindingly obvious. And I really don't want to put the idea out there that anime CG needs to look this good to be acceptable. In fact, I'm personally of the opinion that so long as the computer graphics are facilitating a level or scope of storytelling that an artist or studio couldn't otherwise achieve on schedule and in budget through traditional means, they're justified no matter how rough or dated they end up looking. And I know I probably won't convince most of you to agree with me on that point, but while we're on the subject of how graphics age, it's always been a little weird to me that anime folks bitch so much about 3D anime when, in the gaming world, 3D titles that ape the look and feel of anime have, historically speaking, aged the best out of anything in their respective console generations. And presently speaking, the 3D anime style has quite clearly proven to be quite appealing to the many players of Genshin Impact, who love looking at that dang game so dang much, specifically its 3D anime style characters, that the Genshin Impact team made over $1 billion in just its first 7 months on gacha pulls for those characters. And hey, what a coincidence! I just remembered they used some of them dollars to sponsor this very video and have me tell you about another extremely pretty thing they made. Lovable as its huge and goofy cast of characters is, the biggest draw in Genshin Impact, literally and figuratively, is its breathtakingly vast sandbox world. And Genshin's new YouTube short, Scenery and Sentiment Mondstadt Edition, captures the wonder and enchantment of the traveler's first steps into that world, from the starting beach to Storm Terror's lair, in gorgeously hand-painted traditional animation. which does have an undeniable magic to it that 3D can't quite capture, especially when the animators put this much love into making those richly detailed, hand-painted backgrounds move. From blowing clouds and billowing smoke, to syrup dripping down the edge of a steaming stack of pancakes, to water splashing and rippling, and leaves blowing in the wind. As someone who grew up always knowing which rocks Goku was about to blow up, seeing such gorgeous paintings brought so seamlessly and thoroughly to life just makes my jaw drop. And the cohesive tangibility of the world in turn makes the subtle magic that occurs within it feel oddly natural and very convincing. The short's so full of tiny animation flourishes that you can watch it a dozen times over and still pick up on something new, and it's so cozy and nostalgic that you'll want to. It really makes me wonder what other parts of Teyvat might look like in this style, but for now, you can take your sentimental tour of scenic Mondstadt at the link below. You know, writing that ad spot actually helped a bit with my unbridled rage at the other side of this issue by reminding me why I myself used to be a 3D anime hater. That magic intrinsic to traditional animation of seeing real ink and paint moving on real paper, or at least scans of real ink and paint, is lost with the overuse of CGI. And cell shading, even really good cell shading, doesn't magically bring it back. Now, that kind of 3D trickery is a magic of its own, as anyone who knows the first thing about computer graphics or 3D modeling can tell you, but you do need to know that first thing to fully appreciate the tricks, whereas the wonder of a drawing come to life is intuitive and universal. Not that you can't achieve it with CGI, lots of anime do all the time, like every season, because pretty much every anime background nowadays, even if it is hand-drawn, was drawn on a computer, and a lot of them are just 3D CG renders mimicking the look of watercolors or markers or oil paint, which they do so well that a lot of people don't even notice unless the camera starts moving through them. But to be fair, it is the noticeable CGI that the haters mainly hate on. The reason that and I would guess a lot of you, got into anime in the first place is I fell in love with that classic 2D magic when I was young, and found myself increasingly disappointed with all the extremely early 3D and Flash-style cartoons coming out of America as I was growing up. So maybe it was only natural that seeing those CG elements creeping their way into the background of this last bastion for the traditional process would be met with such a strong pushback, especially considering how obvious it was that most of these studios were still figuring out how to make a lot of this stuff work at the time. As a Canadian, I can only imagine how jarring it must have been for American otaku my age, getting to enjoy the full hand-drawn beauty of titles like Cowboy Bebop on TV when they were still fresh, only to see Adult Swim and Toonami's lineups shift towards shows like Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex and IGPX. Only Cowboy Bebop also had CGI in it. Quite a lot for the time, actually. Like, every time the Bebop goes through an astral gate or orbits a planet, it's there. And it looks fucking sick. The series' portrayal of life in space wouldn't be half as convincing without it. And you know what? The standalone complex opening looks sick too. The animation is so good, especially on the Tachikomas, and the only part of the graphics that really feels dated at all is a few improperly aliased jaggies. The lighting and shading effects still hold up 2 decades later because they went for their own exaggerated style instead of trying to perfectly emulate either reality or traditional anime. The cityscape is utterly stunning, and even the Major's character model manages to stay mostly out of the uncanny valley, even if some of the motion capture does drag her back into it. But, like, look at her face. Look at her hair. They made this in 2002. You know what Pixar was doing in 2002? Hiding their first marginally acceptable human character inside a Halloween costume for most of a movie because she still really did not stand up to scrutiny. And you know what else looks sick? IGPX, mostly. Yeah, sometimes it looks like the characters are walking around an early Myst-style FMV game, and sure, you sure can tell they animated and rendered these mechs in 2005, but the sense of blistering momentum that even those dated graphics convey in motion is undeniable. The races feel intense and visceral, putting you right there in the thick of the action in a way that simply wouldn't be feasible with any other kind of animation. Not without the time and money to make another Akira anyway, and yeah, as someone who loves looking at Akira, it does kinda suck that they'll never make any more Akiras, that the existence of this much more efficient technology all but guarantees that nobody will ever again spend that much time and money on consecutive hand-painted cells. But if the trade-off for that is that any anime studio can now tell stories with the same energy and sense of cinematic style as Akira on television, I'm inclined to think that's worth it. And that's without even taking into account all the new visual possibilities that CGI has opened up for animators. Like, they legitimately could not have made Cowboy Bebop without it. And there are countless other classic anime that simply could not have been made without the aid of computers. For example, Akira. Not only are the fancy rainbow colors in Dr. Onishi's pattern indicator computer generated, but 3D software was used to tweak lighting effects throughout the film, pre-visualize the parallax backgrounds, and even calculate the trajectory of falling objects in some of the more complicated destruction shots. So when Katsuhiro Otomo fully embraced CGI for Steam Boy, it wasn't the deviation from Akira's legacy as the greatest 2D film ever that some make it out to be, but the logical next step of the processes that made that movie possible. Using computers to achieve a scale of both destruction and mechanical complexity that not even the most expensive piece of traditional animation in history could match. Because there are some things that 3D CG just does better. Complex mechanical animations being a prime example, since they're often extremely fiddly and intricate and don't benefit nearly as much as other kinds of animation from the organic feel of traditional techniques. Now, don't get me wrong on this. Hand-drawn mechanical animation is one of my favorite things in the world. Laputa's my favorite Ghibli deal. I could make an entire video about the spaceships in Cowboy Bebop and all their fiddly little panels. And I love the exaggerated energy of the 2D mech fights in Gundam The Witch from Mercury so damn much. But I also love the hyper-complex transformation sequences of Gundam Unicorn just as much. And the massive chaotic ground battles of 86. The insanely intricate pachinko mechanics of the Bog from Kaiji. And, of course, the delicately detailed steampunk machinery of Steam Boy and Last Exile and Drifting Dragons, and especially Appare Ranman, which blends those qualities with a cowboy wacky races take on the high-octane 3D vehicular action pioneered by Initial D. As an original anime concept, I don't think Appare Ranman would have even made it past the pitch phase without the 3D CG technology to back it up. And not just because that tech makes the concept more feasible. Unless you have the time and money and insanely unique creative vision to make another Redline, CGI will always do high-speed vehicle shenanigans better. Even the most ancient and crusty shots from Season 1 of Initial D still convey a more convincing sense of speed and weight than 95% of anime that try to do races or car chases traditionally. And the bottom of the barrel for 2D animated cars is so much lower than even X-Arm could manage. Of course, this strength of 3D isn't just limited to motor-based racing, and with strong enough art direction, you don't even need to use really high-end modern CGI to achieve that effective speed and make your show look good even today. Skate the Infinity uses a Mode 7-esque 2.5D rendering style reminiscent of the original Initial D to depict its crazy downhill jam track, and it both looks and feels fucking awesome. Skate also happens to be the first anime of its kind, because before CGI, making animated skateboarding feel good at all for the length of an entire series was just economically impractical. And we're still just skimming along the surface of how CGI can enhance anime's action potential. The sky is the limit with this stuff. Like, literally. I mean, would Attack on Titan be the mega hit it is today, or even work conceptually at all if its soaring maneuverable gear action scenes had to be confined to the characters swinging through mostly static hand-drawn backgrounds? If it couldn't use those sweeping camera shots to convey the sheer enormity of beasts like the Colossal Titan? What would Demon Slayer be without the flowing kinetic feel of its sword fights? Would Kaiji's steel beam crossing be half as tense without the sense of vertigo conveyed by those 3D backgrounds? What about Reg and Rico's perilous descent into the abyss? Hell, even as janky and dated as they can be, can you honestly say that Last Exile would be improved by removing or simplifying its dogfights? Now, a counter-argument you often hear from purists when praising those aspects of a 3D enhanced anime is, oh, that's just brain-dead spectacle. It doesn't really add anything to the story. And that's wrong for a lot of reasons. Action is one of our most vital and versatile visual storytelling tools. But even if you want to pretend it's a valid point, it's also a very easy one to dismantle on its own terms. Just look at the only season of The Promised Neverland and the way it uses fully 3D environments to convey narrative tension with POV, panning and tracking shots, and other kinds of normally live-action exclusive cinematography. CGI has drastically expanded the vocabulary of cinematic language that anime can employ, especially on a TV schedule and budget, and we can see this in action in just about every great modern anime thriller or drama, from Psycho-Pass to Erased, and stretching all the way back to the undisputed king of the genre, Monster, circa 2004. There are countless examples of great anime stories that wouldn't be nearly as great without their 3D elements. And even with all of the examples I've just listed, we're still just scratching the surface by focusing on CGI realism and the emulation of 2D techniques. When anime uses this tech to explore the surreal, from the ethereal dream worlds of id Invaded to the bizarre shitposts of Pop Team Epic to the horrifying nightmare labyrinths in which Madoka Magica's witches hide, we can glimpse a realm of truly infinite visual possibilities. And indeed, Madoka's studio, Shaft, has built an incredibly strong visual brand by exploring those possibilities, by leaning into the jarring juxtaposition between hand-drawn and digital assets and effects to create some of the most striking shots and scenes and entire series in the entire medium. While Masaaki Yuasa's Science Saru has concerned itself a little more with exploring the possibilities of digital 2D animation, you can absolutely say the same for them. And what millennial anime fan can forget their first look at Mamoru Hosoda's clean and colorful vision of cyberspace? And it's important to understand, none of this is new. The potential of abstract 3D imagery has been understood by Japanese animators as far back as the second ever use of CGI in anime, 1984's Lensman, which uses most of its CGI in an extended Tron-inspired dream sequence as our hero endures a psychic attack from the pure energy wireframe villain. I'd be lying if I said these effects have aged completely gracefully, but Compared to the first ever use of CGI in anime, the helicopters from Golgo 13 made just 1 year prior, the difference is night and day. And it's not a difference of technology, it's a difference of artistic vision and implementation. From its very inception, the problem with this stuff has never been that this style of animation is just inherently bad, but rather that a lot of the people working with it haven't fully understood how to play to its strengths and against its weaknesses. And from the very beginning, many of 3D animation tech's most ardent critics haven't seen that because they understand those things even less. The first trope entry on Steamboy's TV Tropes page reads, 2D visuals, 3D effects. The film relies heavily on digital animation for vehicles, matte paintings, and complex animation sequences. Given that this was early 2000s era CGI, it's an element of the film that hasn't aged well the more time passes. And all I can say to that is, yes, it has. Fucking look at it. Why would you say that? This is what poorly aged CGI from that era looks like. I mean, in researching this video, I've seen people complain that the 3D camera movement in Steamboy is too jittery because they frame matched it to the characters who are animated on 2s, but not doing that is why Handshakers makes everyone who watches it want to vomit. The Promised Neverland, made in 2019, 15 years after Steamboy, does the exact same thing with its 3D shots because that's the established best practice for 2D, 3D compositing, which Steamboy specifically helped to establish during its 10 years in development hell, along with just about every other best practice for this stuff. And to dismiss all that work, that artistry, and downplay their achievements when actually you just don't know what you're talking about and are hating for no reason is incredibly shitty. As I think I've more than thoroughly proven at this point, anime CGI can and often does look great. And that's been true for literally decades. We've all just been hating. Though one area where we have all still legitimately been waiting for 3D to catch up to 2D is, of course, with fully 3D anime characters who just never quite look right, you know? From anime's first true bite of the 3D CG forbidden fruit with Appleseed to modern day sins like Berserk 2016, there are countless examples of polygonal horror mannequins masquerading as anime cells and ruining everything. Even countlesser if you count the ones in the backgrounds of the equally countless B-tier flavor of the season light novel things. Though with that said, like CGI backgrounds, CGI background characters can also be made virtually indistinguishable from hand-drawn assets with good placement and compositing. And there's lots of A-tier flavor of the year anime that use them so well you don't even notice half the time. Fact is, in 2022, fugly 3D background characters come entirely down to bad implementation on the part of individual studios, not inherently bad technology. And the same goes for fugly 3D foreground characters, at least since 2017 through 2019, when Land of the Lustrous, Into the Spider-Verse, and Beastars collectively figured out how to make hand-drawn effect CGI look every bit as magical as the practical ink and paper illusions that inspired it. Not the same kind of magic, but CGI's own distinct kind that takes advantage of the strengths of both mediums. Though, actually, a lot of that had already been figured out by Daisuke Ishiwatari's team at Arc System Works for their fighting game Guilty Gear Ixard Sign all the way back in 2014, which looked so good it landed them a contract making not just the best ever Dragon Ball fighting game, but also helping with CGI for the Super Broly Dragon Ball movie, which also looked very good and came out in 2018, and I think they deserve some of the credit that the Spider-Verse team is getting. And they're not the only ones who've been working on cracking this problem in their own way. Studio Suns again started experimenting with frame limiting of cel-shaded assets in Arpeggio of Blue Steel in 2013, did some really impressive shit with model swapping for Bubuki Baranki in 2014, and ever since then, they've been putting out anime that look pretty fucking good, IMO. Except when they don't, and then they really don't. But I'd say that more than half the time, particularly in the fight scenes, the visuals in Sanzagen shows totally pop. And since Spider-Verse and Land of the Lustrous happened, their shit's hit another level. Most anime CGI has, though some studios are taking longer to catch up than others. And if you compare even dog shit tier CGI anime of today, like Rusted Armors, to once bleeding edge productions like Appleseed, you can see a much stronger understanding of how to control the computer-generated image to achieve that desired hand-drawn effect. Even Gemba, one of the studios responsible for Berserk 2016, made huge strides in just a couple years with 2019's The Magnificent Kotobuki, which isn't quite there yet in the character animation department, but more than makes up for it with the best diesel punk aerial dogfights ever put to film. Seriously, if you like planes, especially if you have a good sound system, watch this anime and thank me later. Of course, those dogfights only look so good precisely because they're not trying to perfectly ape the look of 2D animation, and that's also a very valid approach. Shinji Aramaki's team at Sola Digital Arts, made up of a lot of folks who worked on the original Appleseed, took their lessons from what didn't work there in a very different direction, developing a pseudo-realistic style of their own that really came into its own just last year with Ghost in the Shell SAC 2045, and especially Blade Runner Black Lotus. And on the subject of anime-style streaming original CGI series, The Dragon Prince makes a very strong case that this tech is just as effective in realizing vividly painterly fantasy-scapes as it is grittily wet dystopian cyber slums. And then, of course, Arcane instantly ends this argument with the most literal expression of the phrase every frame a painting this side of Loving Vincent, which, for obvious reasons, doesn't have anywhere near as many moving parts in its entire runtime as Arcane does in certain shots. This look with this level of detail would be simply impossible to achieve practically. And yet, the magic of it is every bit as self-explanatory as ink on paper. So, fully CGI anime are fully valid, and once again, they have been for a while, though not as long a while. A style that works has been found and iterated upon a lot, and lots of both derivative and alternative styles have found their own ways to kick ass and look good doing it. Maybe not always as good as a top-tier hand-drawn theatrical anime production can look, but certainly consistently better than your average TV light novel thing. And now we have Chainsaw Man, combining lessons the artists at MAPPA learned from Dorohedoro and Inuyashiki with the processes that gave us Jujutsu Kaisen to create essentially Arcane's equal opposite. A 99% aesthetically consistent, majority hand-animated series that maintains the full visual dynamism of a live-action film or 3D production throughout its entire runtime. Chainsaw Man combines CGI and traditional animation so cohesively that some of the 3D haters are accidentally hating on fully hand-drawn sequences. The CGI in Chainsaw Man doesn't take away from the 2D animation. If anything, like Violet Evergarden before it, the sheer quality and dynamism of the assets surrounding their work seems to be pushing these 2D artists to elevate their craft. And far from being distracting, you often have to actively look for the CGI to notice it at all. Every criticism I've ever heard in any anime space about the use of CG, Chainsaw Man almost fully addresses. And yet, they're still hating because hating on CGI is the entire point. This isn't an opinion based in technical expertise or aesthetic sensibilities or even personal taste anymore. It's just a fucking meme. And for the sake of both viewers who are missing out on tons of great anime due to this stigma, and the talented 3D artists whose hard work is being stigmatized, it is well past time that meme fucking died. I'm Geoff Thew, professional anime appreciator, signing out from a calm blue lake.